maple syrup. Hey, that was not bad. I think
That was really good.
I've taken a break, right? We've had a
Yeah.
couple days off, and I wasn't able to play it the day that Ammon was on because nobody could hear me. So it's been good. Well, hey, everybody. It's the Maple Syrup Show, and we're live. We're here with Eric Rios today, and Eric is the designer of the fantabulous Spirit Island and other games as well. But Eric, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, because this is your first time on the show.
It is. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Eric Royce. I have been gaming pretty much my entire life, but discovered Euros maybe about, I don't know, 20 years ago via El Grande, which I gave to a friend as a gag gift.
What?
And it turned out there was a whole running thing regarding a role-playing game we were in Spain. And so I'm like, here, it's a board game about Spain. And it was sort of like, okay, well, we might as well try this thing. And it was really good.
Yeah, El Grande is like a classic.
It is. So like that was actually my it was not Catan which got me into sort of modern hobby games. It was totally El Grande. Prior to that, I played, both Steve Jackson games, Looney Labs games, Magic the Gathering, Robo Rally, a bunch of sort of like, things sort of which exist on sort of like sort of interstitial between larger world and hobby. And sort of, I guess, German Euro games specifically. But that kind of got me into what is this? And I bought a bunch of stuff, played a bunch of stuff. I'd always sort of enjoyed house ruling and extending games and making my own from time to time too, both video game, board game, and otherwise. And that just kept on snowballing. At some point I said, I'll bet you I could make something that's as good as this after playing something with a particularly terrible rule book. I'm like, I can do better than this. And so then that sort of set me on the path to prototyping and shooting to get my designs published.
Wow.
And what was your first design?
First published design?
No, just your first design. Can you remember the first game you made?
The first design that I can recall making was a war game with a friend of mine when we were maybe 7. It was, those little like green plastic army figures.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So we came up with, we were like, what do you do with them? Just like pew pew, fall over like cops and robbers style. So we came up and we made a simple war game rules. Like the slow movement was like the short edge of my teddy bear's blanket, and long movement was the long edge of my teddy bear's blanket. And like the basket which they came in turned upside down was a tank, and
fun.
So that's the first one I can remember. The second was like a roll and move with my family.
Neat.
Yeah. So
Eric, can you pronounce your last name again just so I get it right?
Royce. The EU is a German oi, like in Freud.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds just like the Royce in Rolls Royce, just spelled differently.
Royce. Okay, good. Got it. Because I was mispronouncing it. So I was going, I don't think this is right, but let's get it right. Okay, cool. So that's kind of basically your origin story. But we have you here for a specific reason. Excuse me. Kat, can you go over the reason? Because it's actually your reason today, right?
Yes. So as the people who have been watching this show for a minute or two will probably have noticed, I have suddenly gone from not going to conventions to going to lots of conventions. And at those conventions, I have been playing my own games with people, or play testing my own games with people. And I've also been play testing other people's games. And so as well as learning to run play tests myself, I've been learning to be a play tester. And those are two completely different skill sets. And one of the things that I've learned from that is the things that I really don't like it when people do when they're playtesting. Those are really obvious things, like being mean and talking over other people and stuff. And the things that I found really fascinating and clever that other people do. And those were much harder to learn and much harder to understand in a lot of ways, because they took a lot of patience and skill for those people to develop. And one of the best playtesters I think I've ever had is here today, Eric Royce. And one of the reasons that I really appreciate that is because someone coming from sort of the Spirit Island level doesn't necessarily need to be spending time in Unpub helping people out, right? But even though these games that you're playing aren't at all Spirit Island games, you're not trying to turn them into Spirit Island. You listen, you ask people what they're trying to achieve, and then you try and find ways to help them get there. And that made me go, oh, this is the kind of playtester I want to be. So it may have been yesterday. I don't know. The days have all kind of melted together. But I made a little like thought thread on Blue Sky of just sort of some of the conclusions I had come to sort of thinking about playtesting and the things that I had been wanting myself to do. And people found it really interesting. And I thought, well, maybe we should do a show about that. And so I asked Eric along, and here we are.
Yeah. There you are. Do you want to, Kat, go over your steps, like one at a time, and we can talk about them?
Yes.
I think you've got like, what, 12? Yeah.
Yes, there are 12.
You have an 11.5. That's and a 9.5.
There are little extra bits because of the restrictions of like how much you can fit in a post. So what I basically said is I've been thinking a lot about the difference between being kind and being nice. So, for example, it's nice to say only positive things when giving playtesting feedback, but it's not kind because you're giving people a false sense of success. So if you think about how some people got on like those singing shows, for example, and they get on stage and everyone laughs at them, how did they get there? Probably a lot of people were nice to them and no one was kind enough to say, you can't sing. Do you get what I mean? Like being kind isn't always nice. And in the same way, we don't want people, going to all the trouble of publishing something like a game, all that work and everything like that, without saying to them, hey, this doesn't actually work that well. And so that's that thing that is really difficult to navigate because it's hard to say to someone, I'm not sure this is working that well, without being mean. And I've noticed that a lot of different playtesters from me like to use words like, oh, harsh. I like to give harsh feedback and things like that. And I think, well, that's not necessary. Honest is good. You don't have to be harsh. And so what I'm trying to work on, I was on a panel at PAX West about this as well, about giving and receiving feedback. And it's something I'm trying to, I guess, establish a new baseline for, because I've seen there's been a lot of really aggressive feedback that gets given at these kinds of things sometimes. And if a designer is upset about it, generally they're told that they shouldn't be there if they can't take it. And that's something I would really like to change.
Yeah, it's a little gatekeepery.
Yeah. And you're not there to have your game ripped apart, which is something someone very proudly said to me during Unpub. At the table next to mine, they were sort of, oh yeah, sort of saw me looking over, oh yeah, we're ripping this game apart like this. And I sort of just went, and he changed his tone. That game happened to be George's game, my husband's game. So I wasn't terribly thrilled about that terminology either. I mean, help us, but don't shred things. It's not necessary.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it depends on the intention and the language used, and then also the expectation of the person who's asking for feedback. If they say, yeah, be totally, rip it apart, I want to see it like shred to the bones, then cool, go at it. But you shouldn't go in assuming that's what everybody wants or needs or can even handle, right? And just being unable to handle it doesn't mean you're not good or that you're not supposed to be there. That is kind of a not a misnomer because we're not naming anything, but it's a misperception of what feedback is about, right?
It's not about making people cry. And I've heard a lot
No.
of people like, ah, ha, ha, we made someone cry. And I'm like,
What?
You excuse me, you what?
They don't get the kindness flag. That's
Playtesting should be an act of generosity, both in the actual testing and in the feedback itself, which, as you say, doesn't mean being nice. The earlier you change a game, the easier it tends to be. Like just before publication, changing things is ridiculously hard. But early on in a concept, changing things can be much, much easier. So the sooner you bring issues to somebody's attention, the easier it is for them. And that's the kind of spirit which I feel like you should be giving your advice in. It's like, raising up the flag and saying, hey, there's a problem here. You might want to know about it. And it might be that they are not in a space to listen, because receiving feedback is also a skill and people practice that skill. And like, I have better days and worse days on that. But you can't, even if somebody's not in a good place to listen, unless it's something ridiculously important, like, I don't know, like, hey, so your game is glorifying Nazis or something, then, you don't want to be strident about it, because even if they don't listen now, it'll, it may fall and percolate. And, I've had games where I took somebody's advice literally years after they gave it. Because it kind of, the seed sprouted, and it's like, oh, and then later I'm like, oh, they were right. They were totally right. I should have listened earlier.
That's a really good point, actually. The very first time I showed one of my game designs to another designer was when Sen very generously gave us an hour of his time. And Sen said, this is 2 games, and you should be aiming to get the gameplay under 45 minutes. And those 2 things made me go, what? You don't know anything about my game. You're wrong. Like, that was my instinctive reaction inside. And I didn't say that out loud because I understood I was getting like the time of this published amazing person who was, being awesome. But in my head, I was like, this is wrong. Oh, and it took me so long to digest. And it was right there, obviously, very clear. It was very obviously 2 games and very obviously way too much in them because it was the first one and it was a kitchen sink game. And this is what happens. And, it's normal. New designers go, my child, how dare you? And that's one of the things as someone giving feedback you need to be thinking about is, and Sen, you did that beautifully. You just let me have it. Like, you just gave me the information and you didn't push me and you didn't go, no, you have to acknowledge what I'm saying. You just went, this is something to consider. And then you left me with it. And so I was able to process and digest that and internalize it and sort of figure out how I was going to address that without feeling like I had to resist it and without feeling like I had been browbeaten into something I didn't think was something I wanted to do. And so that,
I'm very bad at browbeating. I can't reach that high.
Yeah, it's definitely, something I associate with you. Anyway, so what I thought I would do is just go through the list of the different types of categories I was looking at so we can sort of have some sort of structure.
Yeah.
So I try and bear in mind how I'm helping people and how can I make my feedback easy to absorb and process. So the first way that I do that is I prioritize. So when I'm looking at a prototype, I know it's full of issues because all prototypes, no matter what stage they're at, they're going to have issues. It's a prototype. That's the point. So the things that I look for are which issues are the ones that feel like they're major barriers, which are just minor irritations. And then I try and deliver my feedback in order of priority. And I pay attention to how that designer is looking and how I think they might be feeling. And I address the highest problems and then work my way through. And if I feel like they're starting to be like, I just leave it. It doesn't matter that this is not colorblind friendly right now. That doesn't matter right now. We can deal with that later, or whatever.
If you reach the end of the list, I often find that reiterating the most important thing can also be good. So you start at the highest priority, then go through the others, and then cap it off with. But I think the big thing is X or X and Y, and then there's a bunch of other littler stuff.
Yeah, if you only have time to fix one thing, this is a thing I think you should focus on. That's a good way to do it.
Yep.
Another good thing is, like, if you don't know what the priority of the person is, ask them. Just like straight up ask them, because they might know. and to all designers out there who are seeking feedback, it is really doing you and your game a good service to think about what are the things you are looking for. And I think Kat will get to that later, because feedback is a two-way street. I can't really give you good actionable feedback if you don't tell me what kind of feedback you want, right? It really helps the whole process if everybody identifies what kind of feedback you want. What, are you good with, straight up, this is what I'm going to tell you kind of feedback, or are you somebody who's a little precious about your game right now? And that's okay. We all get in that phase. Like, I'm really pretty beholden to this, so, take it easy, or this is my first game, so please,
yes.
I'm a little bit,
who knows?
a little bit fragile.
This is my first time testing with designers.
Every now and then you'll also run across somebody who doesn't want actual conveyed feedback. What they want to do is watch people playing. And what they're specifically looking for is body language, the experience of play. Most of the time designers will also want the verbal stuff as well. But if all they're looking for is to have watched you played, then like spending 30 minutes afterwards unloading thoughts on them may not be helpful.
Yeah, that's me personally. Like if you ever play games with me, I'll gladly listen to you, but I'd rather just watch you. Because that's my skill is in watching people behave, right? So I will also listen to you though. If you really feel like you need to talk to me about it, that's okay. That's totally cool too. And I think added on to that priority list idea is that maybe, hey, is it okay if I email you the rest of my feedback? I want other people to have time. These are the things I thought were important based on what you told me. Here's a couple little fiddly bits that, just out of random left field, I think that might help you make a better game. And you just email that to them. They can digest it at their own leisure. They can delete it if they want. It's just there. So there's a lot of strategies there. Prioritize. I like that one.
Well, also because I often have. Go ahead.
No, go.
Also, oftentimes, like I'll have thoughts hours or even days later where it's like, oh, penny drops. That's what I couldn't really put to words.
Yeah.
And that's what I was about to say. As a designer running the playtest, one of the things that I cannot recommend for you to do enough is to give every single playtester your card with your contact details and say, if something occurs to you later, please feel free to contact me through this. Please.
And that shows your openness in general. If maybe I'm not open today, right now, because I'm tired, it's at a con, I gotta run, but I would love your feedback in another venue, another time, another space where I can sit and digest it. And I think the idea of articulation is really important. A lot of people suck at articulating their feedback, and they might suck at how they give it to you. And maybe writing it is a better way for them to do it. If they, when we're talking about nice and kind, a lot of people can't or have a real problem being nice, even if they are kind. They have a real problem being nice verbally, not because they don't know how, but because you're on the spot and you're trying to be technical and you're trying to be articulate, and it's hard to do that and be nice at the same time.
Or they're excited.
Yeah.
Or they're
So sometimes giving the space.
They want to get through to you, or it's loud, or they've been at a convention for 3 days. Or,
And there is that reciprocity, that almost unspoken desire or need for reciprocity when you're face to face. Like, you must acknowledge me. And that is a kind of a dangerous space to tread on if somebody isn't acknowledging you, right? It's just as a feedback giver, you need to accept that as well as maybe they're not hearing you right now. That's okay. You said your piece. You got your job done. You did what they asked you to do. Whether they receive it or not is kind of up to them. The communication didn't necessarily happen, or you might not think it happened. And that's why maybe emailing it to them later might be good if you see them not being very receptive right now. It's like, hey, I noticed that you're not really focused on what I'm saying, so I'll just email you if that's okay. That's cool. Fine. Travis has a point here. 1 second. Go ahead while I figure out what Travis is trying to tell me here.
The emailing also, I was in at least one playtest at PAX Unplugged where shifting to email for some of my thoughts allowed other people to sit down and playtest again faster.
Yes.
Opened up the table more quickly, which was
that's a great
good
point.
for basically everybody.
Because it's a very limited amount of time that you have for this. If people are more comfortable articulating their thoughts through email, and this is something that's really important to check though, because in some cases you're going to lose that really precious feedback because there are people who don't do that. So if there's someone who says, I would rather tell you, do that, but always offer the option, I think. I think what Travis is talking about is when people are resistant or want to spell out the particular areas that they're willing to talk about, or so saying there might be a part they aren't willing to change. And so that's something that they should be saying at the start of their playtest.
Here's what I want feedback on. Here's what I'm not really looking for feedback on, right? I know the graphic design sucks. We get that.
Exactly. I was going to say they could know that there are particular things like, yes, this is my prototype that I brought here like 3 days ago and have been testing for 3 days. These are issues that I've already identified. You don't need to worry about telling me. I know. let's just focus on the other things. That's a really useful thing to tell your playtesters, because then they know you already know.
And you focus them, right? So playtesting at a convention when everybody's time is valuable shouldn't be, or not shouldn't be, but you'll get more out of a focus playtest. Like if you focus the people on what you want to hear and what you don't want to hear, it doesn't mean I only want to hear good things. It means I want to hear stuff about X and Y, but not about Z. And maybe you don't even get to play Z, and that's okay too. That section of the game doesn't get played. Also very cool. So yes, Travis, a regular note was to change the theme of one of his games called Samson and Delilah. It's literally about the story of Samson and Delilah and the hair and all that kind of stuff. But the whole theme was the reason to make that game. So he's like, I'm not going to do that. Do you find value, Jason Tam asks, in people filling an online form instead of email?
That is very, very debatable. It depends on the types of playtesters you get, the type of form you have given them to fill out, the time between the playtest and when they actually do the form. Like, there are lots of ways that information can be lost. If you have a 15-minute game and you give them a form that is going to take them half an hour to fill out, you are not going to get good value out of that. So you need to also balance those things. In my experience, an online playtesting form in general should have which game they tested, when they tested it, something really simple where they can score it on maybe a maximum of 3 different things out of 5 or 10, and somewhere where they can like write free text, particularly in response to a prompt. So and any other comments kind of stuff. That would be the absolute maximum that I would put in an early game. When I'm at the end, I might only ask them specific questions. That's me. What would you do, Sen?
No, I agree. I think online forums are good, but they also have this sort of air about them. And if you're not good at making forms, like I've seen a lot of sucky forms out there, because making forms is actually an art form. It's actually a science. Like there's a lot of science. Like if you don't actually understand how Likert scales work and how anchoring works in Likert scales, you'll do it wrong and it'll be bad. Like you're not going to get useful data out of it, measurable stuff that you can use to drive decisions. So I would advise doing less of the technical stuff, like click on this box and just like ask prompts, like guide people towards what you want to talk about and what you want feedback on, and let them write a little paragraph about it. I think that's the easiest thing to do. Sometimes people, especially with Likert scales that are like 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, like nobody does stuff that, like, people just have this psychological like resistance to doing anything in the 6, 7 range. It's like 9s and 10s all the times, or 1s and 2s, and stuff in the middle where it actually matters doesn't get really the dearth of data that you actually need to make it measurable. So you think you're doing something that's measurable, and I mean, of course, you don't have to do data and analytics on any of this, but then why are you using numbers? That would be my question.
I tend to use text at one end and the other. So I really enjoyed this game. I would never like to see this game ever.
Sure, but you're anchoring properly then, right? So
yes, that's what I mean. Yeah, I'm sort of following on from what you were saying. And I've done quite a few of these for my work, but I still don't think that they're an area where I would say that I specialize per se. Jason, so hopefully we've answered your question there, and also hi, thanks for joining us. Hi, Jim. So I'll just move on now quickly to the second topic. We've covered some of that. So value is what I was saying there. Value is what's the designer going to get from my comments? Which topics will be the most useful at this stage of development of the game? How can I be the most helpful within the best use of both of our time, and what is the meat of the issue? And the reason that I'm very specific about that is because, as we've mentioned, in a lot of these cases, time is very limited. People are in a time box situation, and often the designer is going, oh, how do I get on to the next thing? And so as the playtester, you don't want to be sitting there taking up like an hour and a half of their time giving feedback. So as George is saying here, he knows he has the option to terminate a playtest at any time. But as a playtester, if I feel like I'm at a point where it's diminishing returns, what's the protocol? It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
You can just as easily say, I think at this point, I'm going to email you. Yeah. But I've got somewhere to be.
Eric, how do you end a playtest?
I think this is one of those cases where context is also really important. Like in the context of, oh, this person whose game I'm playing has a 3-hour slot at Unpub, and they're trying to get as much testing in as possible. You want to try and be more brief. And in a context like at BGGCon last year, where it's like, oh, there's some of us who are just hanging around the Unpub room at like 10 in the evening, nobody's around, and we're just like rotating around and doing stuff very relaxed. So at that point, rambling on and spitballing is a lot more acceptable. It's not going to chew up people's time when they're necessarily trying to get lots of other people through. Or if there's nobody else waiting to play test, like if you're in an Unpub room and it's like, well, I'm the only person play testing, nobody else is waiting on deck, might as well talk about the game some more.
Has that ever happened?
Not recently,
right? But I've just been pretty busy recently, so
yeah.
And the earlier slots at BGG, you tend to like no one much shows up in the morning.
No,
so
and that's a great time to play test if you like being loquacious, right? So something I will say to George, oftentimes I'll ask a question like, so is the rest of the game similar to this? Or is there anything else that you really wanted to see after this? Like maybe they really have a neat scoring mechanism that I don't know because we haven't got to scoring yet. But if I perceive that the rest of the rounds, like there's 6 more rounds and we've done 4 rounds and they're all the same, what's different in the next 3 rounds? What's different in the next 6 rounds? Do we have to play them? So I'll ask that, kind of not like judgy, but like, hey, is there anything different in the next 6 rounds that we need to absolutely see? Because I think I have the idea of how the game's played right now, and I can make comments if you'd like. But if you'd really like me to see like the scoring or anything like that, if that's what you're actually testing and they didn't tell me at the beginning, I'll ask those questions because I'm there to serve them, right? Like Eric said, this is a gift that I'm giving to them. It's my time, but I give it freely. And it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm giving you this time. It's like, no, I want to give you this time. However, is there a better use of it? Should we talk now? Right?
It's also valuable data if you float the idea of stopping and somebody else at the table goes, no, I really want to finish this.
Exactly. That's fine.
That's really good for them to know. Or if everybody else is like, oh yes, we should totally stop, then like they can sometimes read like how invested people are based on the suggestion.
Also, the game could be broken. Just saying. I've had that happen to my own games. It's like, I think this is broken. I'm going to call it. Or somebody said, hey, look, I see this recursive loop here. I think we should stop now. It's like, oh, you are right. Let's stop now and let's talk about why that's a recursive loop. Or let's like not talk anything about that. I know it's bad. Let's just ignore that. Let's talk about the good stuff. What's the happy stuff that happened, right?
I had taken that as being about the feedback session rather than the actual play testing itself. So yes, good point. Both of those, either any party involved in either aspects of those can always stop.
Yeah,
as well.
And I think
it's a social contract, but you're allowed to break it.
Sure. And I think your point, Kat, about priorities and values are like not exactly the same, right? Because what value do I add as me personally, Sen, this type of designer or whatever type of gamer may not be the highest priority, but I really want to speak to this thing because I have a different perspective or I have some expertise in this area or something like that, or there's a cultural thing that is involved or whatever, or my viewpoint and my vantage point as whatever gives me some insight into this that I think will add value, even though it might not be higher on your priority list. And therefore I have to judge as the feedback person giving the feedback this time. It's like, oh, do I talk about the thing that is high priority for them that everybody else has already talked about? Or do I add this high value thing that I don't think he's going to get from anybody else at this particular table because, maybe it's about Legend of Romance of the Three Kingdoms and I'm the only Chinese person at the table. It's like, hey, let me tell you about R3K, and that might be valuable to them at that point, right? So Yeah, I see the difference. When I read it, it's like, is there a difference? And I'm like, yes, there is. There is a difference
Yes,
between
there
value
sure
and
is.
priorities. Yeah.
And
Such a
the third
third
one
tool.
is focus. So,
Oh,
in that sense, what I'm thinking of is really focusing on how to give my feedback. And so, for example, what is the core loop of the game? How do I give feedback that helps boost that experience and ties into the designer's vision? And both of those are really important
I love this.
because I've got to, what's a lot of new designers, myself included, and this is still something that I'm dealing with, struggle to find what is at the heart of their game.
Yes.
What's the bit that matters? So as an experienced designer who's playtesting that game, if you can help pinpoint that, if you can help find that and go, this is actually the bit that's important in your game, you're doing them a huge favor. And that will help them focus. And also, once you've found that, if you can tie that back to their actual vision and the experience that they're wanting to create, and you can help them go, well, actually, you're trying to create this, but the core loop of your game actually is this.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that that's why it doesn't feel right? That's what you're here for as the playtester, to help them spot those things as well.
So what draws you most may be individual. So you can't always speak to like this is the core loop of the game. On a
Yes.
mechanistic sense, you can, but on an experiential sense, it may be like the thing which engaged me most about this
Yeah.
game was this part. This felt like the heart to me. I don't know if that's what
Yes.
you're shooting for.
Yeah.
Yes, that's good.
But that's valid too, right? Because we all experience games in different ways slightly. I
Mm.
think a real key thing about what you just said, Kat, is that, helping people identify the hook is so important because that's what helps us to sell our games to customers, publishers, whatever, is clear articulation of what is the hook of this game. And I think, Eric, you're right that we might not know what it is in general, but we also might be able to say what we thought the hook was or what we found engaging or hooky about the game. Another thing that Kat you brought up, which is exactly what I do in development cycles, is I ask the original designer, "What's your vision for this game? What do you want it to be?" And then I tell them my 15, 20 page analysis of their game is usually where it doesn't match. Right? And
Yes.
then the last 5 pages of that 20 pages is how can I help you develop the game so that the things align, right? The mechanisms align with the vision, right? And whether it's the publisher's vision or the designer's vision or a combination of both, that's really what my job is as a developer, is to align the reality of the mechanisms and how they affect players and how they influence play with the belief of what the vision is. And do you want to change your vision or do you want to change the mechanisms? And trust me, it's actually easier to change the mechanisms because people's visions are very stuck. A lot of
Yes.
people know I want this game to do this. I want this game to feel like this. And I'm here to tell you it doesn't make this happen. So we need to change the mechanisms. And once you explain things to like people like that, it actually becomes very easy because their baby isn't usually the mechanism. Their baby is
Yes.
usually the vision. So
Yes.
if you can get a clear vision from somebody, if they can articulate that to you, then you can help them a lot better. So that might be somewhere here, I don't know, but that idea of linking the focus and the core experience and the core game loop to a vision, or here's what I see, or here's how I feel. Is that what you wanted? That's great. I think that's a really useful way to spend time giving feedback.
It's sort of spattered a little bit throughout because there are a lot of things that tie back to that.
Yeah,
So,
of course.
and I'm making sure that we're staying on time. So, the fourth thing that I look at is accessibility, and I don't do this in this order, by the way. This is just the order that it occurred to my brain. So, accessibility in general means, how does someone interface with this game? So
Yeah.
there are a whole lot of things to consider. And as a single human being designing a game, there's no way you can consider them all. It's just impossible to expect that. And so every single person who is playing your game is bringing something with them. And for me, what I can offer you is that I wear glasses. I'm over 40. I have ADHD, and I have a lot of friends who have various different disabilities and accessibility issues, and who have communicated them to me. And so I can bring that experience with me when I look at your game, and I can give you my perspective.
Yeah. In the context of gaming too, right? A lot of your friends who have taught you about those things taught you about it in the context of, I can't read the text on this card. I can't move this thing, right? Yeah, and just so people are clear, accessibility and approachability are really two separate things. We often will conflate the two, which is unfortunate, but also reality of how words are used, I guess. I don't know. So it's not the same as, simple. It doesn't have to be simple to be accessible. It has to be accessible to be
Yes.
accessible. It's two separate things.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly wouldn't consider Spirit Island, for example, to be simple, but the components and so forth, they've been carefully considered to be accessible, so
Mhm.
people can read those, so people can understand what they're seeing on the board and all of those sorts of things. And I'm pretty sure that you've been through a bunch of other things with the process of that game, but I certainly wouldn't consider it to be something that I would offer to someone as their first game they played. So I wouldn't consider it to
No.
be an approachable.
Right. Yes. Approachable versus
Yeah.
accessible.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. So in terms of accessibility, every single person has some challenge that they have encountered in some way. They have something that they're bringing to the table. They have something that has made things more difficult for them to process that. It's always interesting to hear when someone goes, "Oh, yes, I found the number of different patterns confusing," or "It was difficult for me to parse the information that you gave me," or "I had trouble following along during the teach because I didn't have a written player guide." All of those things, that's all accessibility.
Mhm.
And some people may not have an enormous amount of trouble, it just might be a throwaway comment, but that's something that could make your game inaccessible to people who need that in order to be able to do it at all. So I'm passing over that one quickly because we've talked about accessibility in detail before.
Yeah.
Let's move on to patience. So this is one I struggle with, which is why I wrote it down. We're not all at the same stages of design. I remember not knowing how to process feedback, as I've mentioned earlier, and I know I'm always learning to be better. If I'm patient when giving feedback, I'm giving someone else a chance to process and learn too. And I have to sit there and go to myself, be patient, because sometimes
Or learn how to use the block button, Cat.
do a what?
Learn how to use the block button.
Well, I mean, I was pretty patient this afternoon.
Were you? I mean, you were. I'm kidding.
I
I'm
was
joking.
pretty patient, but no, the block button happened. Anyway, I thought I was being patient. For me, I was. Anyway, patience is something I have to work on.
It
Anyone
is a
else have trouble
virtue.
with patience? That's probably my favorite thing about your feedback, Eric.
Hmm?
You are very patient in giving your feedback. How do you do that?
Practice. It's and also partly practice, partly I enjoy talking, and so like even if the game I'm talking about like pushed no buttons for me and I hated the experience, at the very least I can enjoy, and I enjoy not just talking but also thinking about games is fun. Like
Yeah,
it's
you strike
enjoyable.
me as a very thoughtful dude. Thoughtful.
So,
Yes.
so it's so even if the experience of the playtest was very unpleasant, getting to the feedback portion is like, oh, now we get to talk about the game. Like it's uh the I'm usually doing a little bit of dancing on eggshells in that case because I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings while still getting across what needs to be gotten across. Um, but that in turn requires a lot of focus, which ideally can sort of hit flow state where it's like, okay, I am focused on navigating the social aspects of this, and so patience kind of falls by the side. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
There's a lot of it, like you say, I'm good at this, but there's a lot of these things which I have never consciously deconstructed how I do them. I just do them. So I don't know. I'm kind
Which is
of
probably better.
guessing
Which is
why.
probably better, Eric, in a
Yeah,
way, right?
yeah. I mean, if you're not conscious that you are being patient, I think that's a good sign, because when I'm
Yeah,
conscious that
he's
I am
unconsciously
being
competent,
patient, it means that it might be ending soon.
right?
I'm like,
Well, so then you're consciously incompetent, right? So that's the thing, right? Is I think there's a good level of being competent at things, and then you can know when you've had enough, and you can knowing when you are getting out of your comfort zone is a good time to like step away from the table or just
Yes.
zip the lip or whatever, right? Say, I'm done giving feedback now.
Yeah.
I'm okay, pass, or next, or
Hmm.
receiving from certain people or whatever, right?
That's
So
the difficult one is,
it
as
is,
a playtester, you can often just go, "Okay, well, that's all I've got. Thanks very much," and stand up and leave. But
yeah.
if as the one running the test, sometimes you can't
Oh yeah,
stop
I
the
mean, you
feedback
have to be
coming.
much more open because these people have given you of their time, right?
Yes.
George asked a question. He said, "Can you talk about how you adjust your feedback around the maturity level, meaning how far a game is along of a particular game or a particular designer?" That's an interesting one.
Mm.
Um, in terms of patience, just before we go to that, in terms of patience, this is possibly why I think some people should send feedback by email because they'll have more time to think about what they're saying.
And
Um,
chill out.
yeah, I mean, but for me, I think I've always been very careful with the words I say because I like precise language, and so I think about language a lot, and I think about what am I saying and how am I saying it, and how will it be received, and what will this person say? And I see the forking paths, and so I always thinking about that kind of stuff. Oh, giving your playtesters paper just to write stuff down is really important. A lot of people don't actually have the vernacular to to talk about games in a meaningful way. Designers might, but even some designers don't. And so we can't expect the feedback to be of a certain pedigree. I don't know what to say about that. A level, whatever, from just people who play games as their hobby. Some of them might know the terminology, some of them might not, and that's okay. And we have to be patient with them too. Uh,
Mm.
but on the other side, as giving feedback in terms of patience, I think um, consider your words, consider how they will impact people, consider is this passing through the gates? So if anybody knows how I think using gates. And is this timely? Is this, helpful? Is this kind? Is it necessary? Those are the four gates. And if it doesn't make it through one of those gates, it doesn't get said. And so I think about these gates. I literally think about these gates while I'm talking. And the number of times I have to bite my tongue, which by the way is a superpower that you don't get until you're about 25, 26, when your frontal cortex is actually very developed. um, that's why as you get more mature you just let it go, let it go.
Oh.
But speaking about maturity of a game, that's an interesting question, George, because I think as a game has more feedback and more design and more time on the table, it's interesting because sometimes you can run into this time where like nobody else has ever told me that kind of feedback to your feedback, right? Or like 300 players have never said that. I don't see why you think it's wrong. So you might get somebody who's a little more dug in. I
Mm.
find sometimes with older designs typically for me, honestly, it's not this is not a good thing. It's not that it's a red flag entirely, but there's something about that as a simple heuristic, right? That says that if the game has been developed for like 8 years and it's still in this state, why is it in that state? Right? I'm
Yeah.
not gonna say it's awful because of this, and I'm not saying all games that have been developed for so long are awful because I have some games that have been on my shelf for years, but I haven't continuously developed them.
Yes.
But the point about maturity, like how far a game is along, is a question to ask, and that's something else. Is like, have you play tested this widely? This is your first. Sometimes having those feeler questions can adjust how I'm going to give feedback to the person. Right? Is this the first time you played it with anybody? Are you how many games have you designed? This is your first game. What is your goal for the game? Right? Because I got in trouble a little bit. Maybe not trouble, but for the my auto critique where people are like, but that's not me. It's like, I know it's not you. I'm not making it for you. I'm making it for people who ask me for feedback. And
Mm.
people who ask me for feedback are looking to get their games on game shelves. If you're an artiste who wants to make an art game, go right ahead. I don't have any
Yeah.
feedback for you. Or I do probably, but it's not this. This is feedback that I commonly give because it's commonly the problem with games that are trying to make it onto store shelves, which is my oeuvre, right? That's what I do. Anyway.
That's the reactions to that were actually just very quick tangent, very interesting.
They were awesome. I loved
People
it.
who got super offended that,
Yeah, it's really funny.
this generalized
Not funny,
list
haha, just
of
funny, interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
And
a
like
there's a list of things that I might say if I play tested your game, and people were like, "This is ridiculous. Why would you say that?"
How could you even say that without playing my
How could
game?
you Well, because this is a list of things that I might say.
Yeah, and to Eric, if you didn't see it,
I did see it. No, it's
they were a little glib. I get that.
Oh, they were totally glib. If you that list, I looked at it and I'm like, oh yeah, this is totally a list of things that I might often say in feedback too.
Just in a different way.
But
right?
also, but the other thing is also that is just important to take it in context that just because a piece of feedback is something you might say doesn't mean that it's necessarily a reason to change the game.
Yes.
Like I went on the list and I'm like, oh, you could say about 40% of these about Spirit Island as published.
Yeah.
And like
as
it does
published.
well enough.
Yeah.
So like it's not that this feedback being there is a deal killer. It's that it's something to think about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just a point that often comes up, right? And so I think that especially for new designers, so Spirit Island, like you were thinking about one of the comments is usually like, there are more parts in here than they might need to be. And Spirit Island has a ton of parts. And when I first set Spirit Island up, it's like, what are all these things? But you soon find out that they're kind of necessary because there's a lot of variety in the game. You're not ever going to use all the pieces in any single game, and that's the beauty of it, right? But you need all those parts.
And there are a lot of parts which were in the game and no longer are. Like there was a lot of cutting which happened. Exactly. Yeah. So it's important to listen, and if you choose to disregard, to do so deliberately. But now we're on the receiving.
Yeah.
On the giving end, for what was it? Oh yeah, adjusting a maturity level for game. Something which I find often happens, and I note this both in myself and in others, is that early in a game's life there's playtesting, and then very late in the game's, sort of just before publication, there's demoing, and there's this period in between where people are running things which there's sort of playtests and sort of demos. Like the game still could change, but it'd have to either be something that's easy to change or really important to change.
Yes.
They slowly harden up like concrete, and so it can be awkward if you say like, oh, like this game has a lot of promise, but I think that there's some fundamental things which would be, the game would be a lot better if it were reworked with these. And it's like, oh, but they're going to Kickstarter in 6 weeks. Like that's a problem.
Yeah, and so
we've already
also
sent the files to the manufacturer.
That's also a problem for the person who's demoing, right?
Yeah.
Like they need to say that stuff up front. Like, hey, we're just playing this to get your emails for the mailing list, guys. Like, be straight up. If that's what you're doing, do that. If you're not going to be receptive to feedback, typos great. Can you please tell us if there's any typos? Right?
Yeah,
that's wonderful. But if you say, we're locked down on files, we can't do rules changes or art changes, but here's what we can do. At least you have set the limits of your people's feedback. Jason Tam's asking, is this advice, the advice that we're giving, the same for paid feedback, or is there a much higher expectation of the type of feedback to get from play testers? So are we talking like professional?
I'd just like to answer that one really quickly.
Yeah.
When I'm saying this list that I'm saying, this is my advice to myself.
Oh, right. Okay, if that's what Jason's asking about, yes.
So this list is not me saying this is what everyone else should do. These are the things that I personally want to work on myself, and that I'm using as us to discuss, like as a starting point for us to discuss in this show. This is not me telling you have to do these things. This is me telling me that I want to work on these things.
But I do think everybody would be well served by at least looking through it and seeing what does apply to them.
Yes.
Because it's quite exhaustive. So one of the things, just going back, one of the key things that in terms of feedback and giving feedback and receiving feedback, Brian Neff of Restoration Games and I always talk about the number one skill that we think game designers need is empathy, which is weird, right? When you think about it, but when you really think about it, it makes sense, because I am going to design games that hopefully bazillions of people will play. And so I have to understand my product's impact on different types of people other than myself, unless I only want one person to play it who is me. Right? So I have to get out of my shell. I got to learn. I've got to understand how people think. I've got to think about accessibility from different points of view. I have to think about approachability from different point of view. I have to think about when I give feedback, who is the actual audience for this game? Is it me? Then I can give feedback as myself. If it's not for me, I need to think about who's it for and give feedback that makes sense for them. Right?
Hmm.
So I think all of that kind of stuff is very important. Um, Hey, Jim asks a question for Eric specifically. While developing and playtesting Spirit Island, that game, that you made, what was one of the biggest aha moments from feedback? Great question, Jim. I like how you wrapped it all together. The
There
guest
were
and the topic.
there were a lot. Spirit Island was in development for a long time.
How
I
long?
don't want to go. 3 years, 5 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
I'm not
It's
surprised. There's a lot.
not my longest game in development. But that's another story. I don't want to go too much into Eric dev stories here. We could be here all night. Um, but no, it's the one which I mentioned earlier about sort of the penny dropping later on. There was an
Oh, right.
entire
Yes.
additional piece in the end game. Sacred sites are any lands where you have two or more presence. They used to be literally a separate piece type, which interacted with the game in a variety of ways. Somebody said, I think these pieces either need to do more or they shouldn't be there. And at the time, I was just like, they are structurally important for a variety of like I didn't say this. It was like, okay, thank you, and I thought about it. But I'm like, no, these are structurally
in your
important.
brain. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, these are structurally important. Like, they have to be there. They're needed for X, for Y, and for Z. Like, if you just pull it out. But then I think it was somewhere between 1 and 2 years later, I was considering another design problem and went, oh wait,
If I just take these out, problem solved.
he was totally right. And if
Yeah.
I take these out, everything will in fact fall apart, but then it will fall apart into a configuration where it can be changed to work even better. So
Right.
it's like, yeah, and it dovetailed with other changes at the time.
Was there a little bit of sunk cost fallacy in there? Like you've already invested time into playtesting that, and you know it works, and I don't want to take it out.
Probably some, but it was mostly just that it would have required changing so many things. Yeah, it was that it would have required changing so much, and all of those things worked and
You're
worked
right. Yeah.
fairly well.
Yeah. I'm in a
So
similar state with a role playing game that I'm making right now. And it's taken me a while to rectify, like 2 months to just like get off my butt and say, I guess I should change that thing that
yeah.
everybody's saying we should change.
It's a
It's
bit like
tricky because
playing
like
Jenga, isn't it? You think,
the
is it
you
gonna
can't take
collapse?
every single piece of advice people give, and like it was literally just one person ever mentioned this to me. It was not common feedback. He
Because it
was
worked.
right, but it worked. It worked reasonably well. But it could have worked better, and he saw that.
Interesting. All right,
So,
let's go on with like the last couple things here, Kat. Like any of the other ones in your 12 that you think are really important.
Yep. I'm going to quickly cover. So the number 6 was humility, and this one is also difficult for me. Not because I think I'm the best; it's because I know I'm the best. No kidding. It's about understanding that my opinion isn't the most important thing in the room. So I may have strong feelings about what needs to be fixed, but I'm not the most important voice in the room. The designer is.
Yep.
So my thoughts are there for them to use as they wish, but they're not decrees they must follow. And I found that there are a lot of playtesters that who've tested my games have really had trouble accepting that I have said thank you and not changed the game based on their decree. And it's my game. Just in the same way, when I'm testing someone else's game, I'm testing their game. So I'm giving them some options. I'm giving them some thoughts. I'm giving them some things that I've spotted. But if they choose not to use those things in their game, that's fine.
Especially if they're giving you solutions as opposed to pointing out the problem, right? That's the general kind of.
I mean, at the end of the day, I've given them what I've given them, and it's their game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what their vision is. Go ahead, Eric.
Oftentimes these days, I try, although I do not always succeed, to divide my feedback. I'll start off going, okay, here's my playtester hat, and I'll say like, okay, these are the things I liked, these are the things I didn't like, these are the moments I really enjoyed, this is what appealed to me, and just go after on a very visceral level, and problems I saw, like this didn't feel good, and then take all of the developerish and designerish spitballing and brainstorming and here's a possible solution and say like, I have thoughts in those direction. Do you want to hear them? Because they may not. And if they and if they do want to hear them, that check-in means that they understand that I understand that it's a different category of feedback.
Yes.
And it may be listened to differently.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I really love about how you give feedback. You explain what's happening. So you say, okay, as a playtester, what I'm seeing is this. As a player, what I'm seeing is this. I do have some thoughts as a designer, as a developer. Would you like me to give those to you? And then you start, and then you check in and you go, do you want to keep working on this? Or do you want me to give you, each time you check in? And I cannot explain how much I appreciate that.
Yeah, the checking in is really important.
I mean, then I feel comfortable each time because I don't feel like I'm being, forced to take your feedback. And I also feel reassured that that we're brainstorming, that that we're playing with these ideas and that I'm allowed to do with them what I want as the designer. And that's what I'm talking about from this perspective, the sort of the humility side of it. I mean, you're coming in here as designer of Spirit Island and you're still saying, do you want my help? It's okay if you don't. And that's very, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that makes it feel safe to test with you because you check. You don't just go, I'm knowledgeable and I know everything. And that's a big deal. So that's one of the things I learned from you that I'm trying to apply.
Someone talked to me at PAX, says Travis, about how much they appreciated Eric's playtester hat separate feedback. I think that's lovely.
Excellent. It's working.
You just got third-party feedback from some random dude named Travis Magram. Just kidding.
Thank you, Travis.
That's awesome. We are running low on time, so let's go.
I'm having a quick look. So we've already talked about trying to make sure that we manage our tone. We've made sure to ask about what the designer is looking for from the session. And we've talked about brutal and harsh not being constructive and better ways of dealing with that. We've talked about being kind, not being necessarily nice. So one way I expressed that was telling someone they have salad in their teeth before they go on national TV it's not necessarily nice, like telling someone they have salad in their teeth can feel like a horrible thing to do. But letting them go on TV with salad in their teeth is definitely not much less nice. So let's not do that. The two that I really wanted to talk about, which kind of go together, are getting myself in the right headspace before I play someone's game and checking in with myself to make sure I am okay. So making sure I've eaten, making sure I've had water, making sure I can listen and I can pay attention and I'm not too tired and I'm not too stressed and I'm not bringing other stuff into it and giving myself distance. Mm-hmm. So this isn't my game. I need to step back. I need to go into a different place and be professional and be helpful and start with things like, have you considered what would happen if, or I wish that. And one of the ways that I sort of look at expressing that is just looking at the way you say something. So why am I playing this game? You can say that in so many different ways. And if you just think about which of those ways you want to say it to that person, that will actually put you in the right place. Like, why am I playing this game? Are you really going to sit down with that? No. Why am I playing this game? Sit down with that. Like, bring them that. So anything else about getting yourself in the right place?
I like what you said. A lot of that is like it's almost like a mantra that you're saying to yourself, right? Like, I'm good enough, I'm strong enough, but here, like, why am I here? And therapeutically, we'd call that, being rationally detached and things like examining what we call precipitating factors of behavior, right? So like, what are the factors that I'm bringing to the table if I am underfed, tired, cranky, haven't, slept for 3 days, really need to go to the washroom. Am I present enough to give this
Yes.
person meaningful feedback? If not, maybe I should step out.
I
Maybe I
have
should let them know, like, "Hey, I'm on 3 hours of sleep here, but I'll play your game if you want me to." And just please take the feedback with that little grain of salt, right? So being
I've
open about that is cool. I think that's
I've
fun.
said that several times over conventions. I've just
Yeah,
said,
for
"Look,
sure.
I feel that the way that I'm feeling right now, it would be disrespectful for me to play your game, but I would love to watch people play it because I'm really interested in your game. I just don't think it would be appropriate for me to play it right now because I wouldn't be able to give it what I think it deserves."
Yeah, I think
And
that's very fair.
yeah, um, just double checking in case there's any. Oh, okay. So this last one is a Maori concept, kaitiakitanga, which means guardianship at a high level. And that's something that I think we need to remember. When we're playtesting someone's game, what we're aiming to do is actually protect and encourage and foster the growth of this designer.
That's right.
We are there to help this person progress. We are there to provide guardianship and encouragement. And we are not here to harm this person. We are here to build them up and help them. And it may involve dismantling their game,
It could.
but it doesn't mean meanly.
No.
And
I
it doesn't
like I like this a
mean
lot. And we have to expect that from the other side too. As a receiver of feedback, we have to go into this understanding that if somebody's harsh, they're just really trying to help us, right? And it doesn't give the person license to be harsh, but it also helps us to understand that maybe that's just their personality, and I can talk to them about that later. I see what you're saying. I really appreciate your feedback. Next time, blah 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 blah. Or hey, the word that you used, I'm not really cool with that, but I do see what you're saying, right?
Mm.
So the validating of experience, the listening to feedback, the really kind of appreciating of people. I think a lot of relationships will change when you understand the intent of what a person is trying to do. Unfortunately, some of the words they use might get in the way, like, I'm harsh and I rip it apart and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to harm me? Because those words sound like harm,
Yeah.
right? And words do matter. But if we can reframe our way of thinking as a receiver, saying, hey, I understand that you're trying to help me. I get that. Here's how you can help me even better next time, might be a good way to kind of reframe the relationship between the feedback giver and the feedback getter. So there you
And
go.
another thing
Hard.
you can do is if you see that happening and you're part of the group, one thing that I did is I just reached out to the designer who was receiving this feedback and I just went, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone at the table stopped behaving like that
Yeah.
because they realized
Yeah.
someone else came over and went, "Are you okay?"
Yeah. A lot of it can be just like, um, we don't do that here kind of feedback,
Yeah,
right? Just speaking
yeah,
up for somebody when they feel like they can't because they are in a power dynamic situation where they don't have the power. It's
yeah.
weird because you think the designer has all the power, but they don't
No,
because they're beholden to the players who just gave them time,
yeah.
right? So there is a power shift there. Sorry, Eric, you were saying something.
Just something that I try and keep in mind, both for myself as a designer and when I'm giving feedback, is that uh, there's sort of there's two feedback on the mechanisms and experience of a game, and critique is amazingly important to make the game better. And praising what you like about it is amazingly important in order to support the morale and the will to change the game of the designer. A
Yes.
designer who is feeling crushed and demoralized, like a few people can derive inspiration from that who are really pugnacious and are like, I'll show them. Although, if I recall correctly, I think the research is that that attitude tends to crop up only when they have reason to believe that the person criticizing them has no reason to know what they're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
And so, like, odds are good that if you give a very, like, sort of aggressive, socially demoralizing critique, you are going to undermine the development of the game because you are going to undermine the motivation of the designer to work on it.
Yes.
Whereas if you support what you see, which is great about the game, then you will be supporting the changes which you hope to see. Also, just on a sheer like social level, like if you're really mean, that's going to carry over into when the designer recollects that feedback. Whereas if you are very supportive, that will also carry over. And so hopefully they will be more likely to listen to the points which are maybe harder to listen to.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. George is saying that the teardown that he received at PAX was actually hugely helpful to him, but it probably could have been easier, quicker to process if there was some consideration of the language and tone used, right? Good point. Amy is talking about the compliment sandwich, which in, also known as the poop sandwich, which is, good constructive feedback. Good, right? So you have the bread, that's good, and the meat of it is the constructive part. And it's funny because in deaf culture, it's all poop. All poop all the time. It's very direct.
But
just 'cause
also
sign language is
the
very
body
direct.
language, because body language is such an important part of delivering like sign language. It's much clearer what someone's really trying to say in a lot of cases as well. So
Yeah, language is like
that
spoken
makes a
language.
difference.
It has weird nuances, right? So there's all that nuance exists in ASL. It's just very different. Anyway, so look, you know what? We've gone a little bit over. I'm so
Where
sorry,
we
Eric.
need to stop.
We
Yep,
need to
we need to
stop.
stop.
Let us know, everybody, in the chat, and tag afterwards if you found this useful. We missed like 6 of Kat's 12 points because we spent like about 10 minutes on each point, which is great because they are really, really useful. So much so, Kat, excuse me, that I think we should make an infographic out of it.
Yes, I think that would be awesome.
Cool. So let us know if you like the show. If you want to talk to me more, you can reach me at Senfeng Lim on Twitter, that X thing, whatever it is, and Blue Sky. Kat, where are you?
At Rink on all the things.
On all the things. And I think Kat got us set up at Maple Syrup on all the things as well.
Yes, we're on Blue Sky now. Find us, follow us.
Yeah. Eric, where are you at?
You can find most of my places via my website, rericroyce.com. I'm also Eric Royce on Blue Sky, and there's also a link to Mastodon on ohai.social, ohai.social. But the easiest way is just go to my website, and in one of the menus is like, here's all the ways to get in touch with me.
Right.
Rerick
Here's
Royce.
the website. There you go.
Rerick.
Rerick.
Yep. Rerick.
Rerick.
Yes.
All right.
That's secret R.
There you go.
Yes.
If you like what you saw tonight and you want to see more, please do support us on patreon.com/maple-syrup. Let us know and we'll keep the lights on. Eric, do you have any final advice?
Yeah. So as game designers, we're all familiar with the importance and the power, the immense power of iterating on a game design. Something that I think is useful is also we can apply that same mindset towards iterating on ourselves as game designers and as feedback givers.
Yes.
Powerful stuff. There you go. Kat, I honestly don't know because I haven't looked lately. What's happening next week?
We don't know.
We don't know either. Amazing.
Who wants to be on the show next week?
Y'all will find out.
Mystery.
It's a mystery show. You'll all find out when we post about it. But it'll be something. It'll be fun. It'll be good. You can watch. And remember to share.
Otherwise, I'll put George on here. Vote in the comments. Are we going to put George on the show, or are we going to have someone else?
I mean, George is literally on the show every week in some way, shape, or form. So
come and be nice. Quick, run, George.
He's actually in the same room right now.
He's ignoring me. He's right there. He's refusing to actually be on the show.
George's like, what? All right, everybody. Thanks so much, Eric. It was wonderful to finally get to meet you.
I'm a real boy.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll actually get to see each other in person someday soon. I think that's it for cons for us for the rest of the year, right?
Yeah, we're done too.
Okay. So we'll see you in 2024 at cons. But we'll be on the Maple Syrup channel here for a little while longer. We usually take a short break over the holidays, and then we'll be back in fine fashion. And Kat and I will actually plan the next season. I think cons got in the way this year, where Kat's like, I'm gonna go to all the cons, all of them.
I'm already going to like 4 cons in like the first 10 minutes of next year. So sorry.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
I've got OrcaCon and Cannes, just casually, just going to France. You know, it's fine.
Oh, you're actually going? Oh, I didn't know. That's
Yep,
cool.
yep. Look, I mean, yep.
Okay.
And then Unpub, Prime, and Gamma Expo so far. So
cool. I will definitely be at Unpub, and then maybe at Gamma.
yeah, don't you have something to tell us about being at Unpub? Isn't there something special about you being
Not
at
that
Unpub?
special. I'm the keynote speaker, I guess.
Yeah, that thing.
But also
Yeah.
Erica is, and she's more important than I am. So there you go. All right. And
All right,
I will
cool.
be at University of Cincinnati doing a keynote for a game design thing there as well. Carla Kopp and I are the keynotes for that one.
Oh, neat.
That's in February, the first weekend of February. There you go. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Excellent. All right. We've kept Eric way too long. It's past his bedtime. He's going to turn into a pumpkin. We'll see you all later. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.